The doctor asked me if I had ever had trouble having children. I said no, 3 boys. He stopped writing. Then he told me that men born with what I have are born without the tubes that carry sperm. Not damaged, not blocked, never formed at all, from birth. I was 58 years old. My oldest son was 30. I had never been able to father a child. Not one, not ever, not for a single day of my life. And I had 3 sons. That appointment was a routine follow-up. I had rescheduled twice, because I did not think it mattered. I had a cough. I had a cough for 20 years, and my family used to imitate it at Thanksgiving. I drove home from that office and I did not tell anybody, and I did not cry, and I did not call my wife of 26 years, who I had been divorced from for 6. I sat in my truck in my own driveway for 2 hours and I decided the lab was wrong. If you have ever had the ground come out from under a life you had already finished building, stay with me on this one. Subscribe before you go any further, because I tell one of these every single day, and you are going to want the next one. Hit the like button while you are here. It genuinely helps this channel find the people it is meant for. And down in the comments, I want your honest answer to something, because I still do not have mine. If a man raises 3 boys for 30 years, are they his? I will be reading every one. My name is on a building in the West Bottoms in Kansas City, Missouri, and it has been since 1995. I started with 1 desk, 1 phone line, a fax machine I bought used, and a rented room above a tire shop on Southwest Boulevard. Freight brokerage. What that means, if you have never had reason to know, is that a company has something that needs to be in Tulsa on Thursday and does not own a truck, and a man in Tulsa owns a truck and has nothing in it, and somebody has to be the person who knows about both of them. For the first 2 years, the person who knew about both of them was me, on the phone, from 5 in the morning until 9 at night, 6 days a week. 31 years later, there are 94 people in that building. We move a little over $300 million of freight a year. I still know the name of every carrier who has been with us since the 90s, and there are 11 of them. In 2011, I put 2 more words on the sign. It says Dolan and Sons. I am going to come back to that sign at the end, and I would ask you to remember that I put it up myself, on a Saturday, with a man named Wade Fontaine holding the other end of it. The cough had been going on for 20 years. That is the part that will sound absurd to anybody who has not lived it. 20 years of a cough, 20 years of sinus infections, 4 or 5 a year, and rounds of antibiotics, and a run of specialists who all said the same 3 words in slightly different arrangements. Allergies, reflux, postnasal drip. I had a CT of my sinuses in my 30s that somebody described as impressive. I had polyps taken out twice. I had a summer, when I was 54, where I got so dehydrated on a job site in July that I ended up in an emergency room in Blue Springs, confused enough that I could not tell them what day it was. They said heat exhaustion. They ran fluids and sent me home the next morning, and I went back to work on Monday. None of them put it together, and I am not blaming them, because I did not put it together either, and I had all the same information. When something has been wrong with you for 20 years, it stops being a symptom and becomes a personality trait. My family used to imitate the cough. It was a joke at Thanksgiving. What finally did it was a pulmonologist named Dr. Catherine Farrow, who I saw because my primary care physician retired, and the new one was 33 years old and had not yet learned to accept my explanations. She did a scan and found bronchiectasis in both lower lobes, which is scarring, which is the kind of damage that takes decades. And then she did the thing nobody had done in 20 years, which is, she asked why a man with no smoking history had lungs like that. Sweat chloride test. It is an old test, and a simple one. They stimulate a patch of skin on your forearm and collect what comes out and measure the salt in it. Mine came back high. They ran it again. It came back high again. Then a genetic panel, and the panel came back with 2 variants, one common and one that is not, in a combination that produces what they call atypical or non-classic cystic fibrosis, mild lungs, working pancreas, normal growth, normal life. A man who is 58 years old and coughs and gets sinus infections and cannot handle a July afternoon, and who was born without a vas deferens on either side. I have read everything there is to read about this since. Congenital bilateral absence of the vas deferens, the tube that carries sperm from the testicle. In men with my genetics, it does not develop. You produce everything normally. It has nowhere to go. There is no ambiguity in it. It is not a probability or a risk factor. It is a structural fact about a man's body that is true from before he is born until the day he dies, and it can be confirmed on a physical exam in about 90 seconds by a urologist who knows what he is feeling for. I had that exam 11 days later. It took less than 90 seconds. The urologist was very kind and very fast, and he did not have to say anything at all, because I was watching his face. My first thought, sitting in the parking garage afterward, was that the lab had made a mistake. I want to describe what I actually did over the following 3 weeks, because I think people imagine that a man in this situation goes home and confronts somebody, and what really happens is that he spends most of a month trying to prove the medicine wrong. I got the sweat chloride repeated at a different institution, under a different order, high. I got the genetic panel rerun by a second laboratory, out of pocket, $2,200, same 2 variants. I got a second urologic exam from a man in Overland Park who had no idea about the first one. Same finding. I read papers. I read actual papers, with statistics in them, at 2 in the morning, looking for the case report of the man who had it, and fathered children anyway. There are a handful of documented pregnancies in men with partial forms. I am not a partial form. I read them all anyway. And when I had run out of ways to be wrong, I ordered 3 paternity tests. That is a strange thing to do. You order them online and they send you 3 envelopes with cheek swabs in them, and you have to physically get the DNA of 3 grown men without telling them why. I got Nate's on a Sunday because he came over for dinner and left a fork. I got Cole's from a water bottle in the truck. Adam I could not do that way, because Adam is 30 and married and lives in Lee's Summit, and I do not see him without a plan. So I asked him to come by and help me move a filing cabinet, and while he was there I offered him a beer, and when he left I put the bottle in a bag. I sat in my kitchen with 3 sealed envelopes in front of me and a permanent marker, and I labeled them, and I have never felt worse about anything I have done in my life, including everything I did afterward. The results came back on a Tuesday, all 3 in the same email, in a portal that required me to make a password. Probability of paternity, 0%, 3 times. Not one of them. Not the oldest one, who has my last name and my temper. Not the middle one, who came to work for me at 22, and is better at this business than I ever was. Not the youngest one, who I taught to drive in the lot behind the building on Sunday mornings. 0, 0, 0. I drove to Lynette's on a Wednesday morning, which I had not done in the 6 years since the divorce. She was living then in a house in Liberty that she got in the settlement, 4 bedrooms, more house than one person needs, with a sunroom she had wanted since 1999, and finally got in 2016. We had 26 years. It would be easy from where I am standing now to say that whole period was a lie, and it was not. There were 26 years, and a good number of them were good. She sat in that room above the tire shop with me on Saturdays doing invoices by hand when we could not afford anybody. She drove to Wichita at midnight once because a driver had a heart attack in a truck stop, and somebody had to go be a human being about it. She let me in and made coffee and asked about my health because the boys had told her about the diagnosis, and she was genuinely concerned in a way I do not think was performed. And I put the 3 reports on her kitchen island and told her what the urologist had told me. She did not deny it. I will give her that, and it is nearly the only thing I will give her. She looked at the papers for a long time, and then she sat down on a stool and put both hands flat on the counter and said, "All right, all right." I asked her who. She said it did not matter. I said it mattered to me. She said, "Ray, there is nothing on the other side of that question. There is nothing there for you. You are going to spend whatever you have left on this, and at the end of it, you are going to know a name, and it is not going to give you one single thing back." And I said, "Who?" And she said no. We went around like that for about 40 minutes. I did not shout at her. I have thought a great deal about why, and I think it is because somewhere in the first 10 minutes, I understood that she was not protecting herself. If she had been protecting herself, she would have lied, and she is a good liar, and I would probably have believed her. She was protecting somebody. That is what I drove home with. Not the fact of it, which I had already had for 6 days, the shape of it. She was sitting in a kitchen refusing to say a name, 6 years after the divorce, with nothing left to lose by saying it, which meant that whoever it was still standing somewhere in my life. I called a firm out of Chicago on a Thursday. They do this specific thing. Not divorces, not insurance work, unknown parentage. The woman who took the case is named Bernadette Cowell, and everyone calls her Birdie, and she has spent 18 years doing what is called investigative genetic genealogy, which is the same method that has been used to identify remains and to close cases from the 70s, and which almost nobody realizes can be pointed at a living man. Here is how it works, and I am going to explain it properly because when I understood it, I understood that there had never been any point in Lynette refusing. You do not need the father's DNA. You never need the father's DNA. You take the DNA of the children and you upload it into the open databases where people voluntarily place their own results looking for relatives, and the system returns everybody in there who shares meaningful amounts of genetic material with them. You are not looking for a match. You are almost never going to get a match. You are looking for third and fourth cousins, of which any American has hundreds, and every single one of them is a corner of a map. Then you build family trees, backward from the cousins, through obituaries and census records and marriage licenses and old newspapers, until two separate branches of two separate trees run into the same couple standing in the same wedding photograph in 1931. That couple had children. Those children had children. You keep going forward until you have a list of men who were the right age and in the right place, and then the list is 9 men, and then it is 4, and then it is 1. It took 6 weeks and it cost me $41,000. At week 4, Bertie called me and said she wanted to check something and asked whether I had spent significant time in the Kansas City area in the mid-90s. I said I had lived here my whole life. She was quiet for a second and then she said, "All right," and I did not understand at the time why she asked, and I understand now. She was asking whether the man she was converging on had been geographically available. She already had the family. She was checking the map against the calendar. The report came on a Thursday afternoon in an encrypted file with a 9-page summary and about 60 pages of trees behind it. I read it in my truck in the lot at the office because I could not wait the 20 minutes to get home. And I want to tell you exactly how it happened because it is not how people imagine it. I did not see a name. I saw a surname on a chart in a box at the top of a branch 3 pages before the conclusion. It is not a common name. There are perhaps 40 of them in the metro. I stopped reading. I sat in a parking lot with a laptop on the steering wheel, and I did not turn the page for about 4 minutes, because I already knew, and I was not ready for the page to know it too. Fontaine. I called Bertie Kowal from that parking lot. She picked up on the second ring, and I asked her one question, which was whether she was certain, and she said yes, and then she said she needed to tell me something about how the last week had gone. She said her team had gotten to a short list of 4 men, 11 days earlier, and had spent the time since eliminating 3 of them, and that the one they could not eliminate had no public record connecting him to my family at all. No marriage, no shared address, no business filing. Nothing, she said, in her experience, that usually means the man is a stranger who passed through once. Then she said, and sometimes it means he is somebody who was standing so close that nobody ever thought to write it down. I thanked her and I hung up and I sat there until the security light in that lot came on, which in October is around 6:45. Wade Fontaine has been my friend since we were 16 years old. We met on a loading dock in the summer of 1983. Both of us hired for the season, both of us bad at it. He is a year older than me. He taught me to drive a forklift, and he did it badly, and I nearly put one through a wall. He was my best man. He gave the toast, and the toast was funny, and there is a video of it somewhere, in a box in my basement. He is godfather to all 3 of my sons. That was not ceremonial. When Cole had his tonsils out at 9, and Lynette had the flu, Wade sat in that hospital room for 11 hours and read to him. He has never been married, never came close, as far as I ever knew. There were women over the years, and none of them lasted past a year and a half, and it became a thing we all made jokes about, the way you do. He was at every Christmas for 29 years, every graduation, every birthday for the boys, every single one, including the ones I missed, and I missed 4 of them because of this business. And I hired him. That is the part I have to say plainly. In 1999, the company was 4 years old, and doing well enough that I needed somebody to run the carrier settlement desk, which is the department that pays the trucking companies. It is the least glamorous job in a brokerage, and it is the one that touches every dollar. Wade had just been let go from a distributor in North Kansas City. He was 33, and he had a car payment and no savings, and he was embarrassed about it. I did not interview him. I called him on a Tuesday and told him to be at the building on Monday. He worked there for 22 years. Everything he had came from that building. His house in Independence, his truck, his health insurance, the knee replacement in 2017. He took 2 weeks of vacation a year and never used all of it. I built that man's entire adult life. Keep that in front of you while I tell you the rest. Because everything that follows is a story about what a person will do to keep standing next to a family he is not in. Now I have to take you back to 1995, because that is where it starts. And because for 29 years I told the story of that winter at parties, and everybody who knew laughed in the right places. Lynette and I got married in 1994. I was 26. She was 24 and working as a dental hygienist in Raytown. In January of 1995, I quit a salaried job with benefits to start a freight brokerage with $11,000, which was everything we had, and I did it over her objection, and she was right to object and I was right to do it, and both of those things are true. For the first 2 years I was gone. Not gone the way people say gone. I mean physically absent. Tulsa, Amarillo, Little Rock, Springfield, Des Moines, sitting in the parking lots of distribution centers at 6 in the morning, waiting for a shipping manager to give me 9 minutes. I slept in the truck to save the $40. I did that probably 90 nights in 1995. We were renting the bottom half of a duplex in Independence, off Noland Road. The furnace in that place was original to the building, and the building was from 1961. In November of that year it went out. I was in Oklahoma. Lynette called me from a neighbor's phone and I could hear that she had been crying, and I stood at a payphone outside a truck stop on I-44 and did the only thing I could think of, which was call Wade Fontaine. I asked him to go over there. I asked him to look at the furnace, and then I said the sentence that I have replayed more times than any other sentence in my life. I said I cannot be there, and somebody has to be. He went. He fixed it, or he got somebody to fix it, I never knew which, and then 2 weeks later her car would not start and he drove her to work. And then he was coming by on Thursdays, because Thursday was the night I was always out, and he would bring something to eat, and he would fix whatever the landlord would not. That is what I knew about it for 29 years. That is the version I told. My best friend looked after my wife in the 2 years I was building this company, and I could not have built it without him. I told that story at his 50th birthday party, standing up, with a glass in my hand, to a room with about 60 people in it, and Lynette was in that room, and Wade was in that room, and I said the words, and people applauded. The thing that happened in that duplex started before Adam was born. They both told me it started after. Both of them, separately, months apart, in rooms where they had every reason to align their stories, and no way to do it, said the same winter, the same furnace, the same year, which is what convinced me at first that they were telling the truth about at least that much. The furnace went out in November of 1995. Adam was born in October of 1996. I sat down at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a calendar app on my phone, and I counted backward from Adam's birthday, and I did it 4 times, because I did not trust myself the first 3. Conception in January of 1996 at the latest. The story they both told me put the beginning of it in the winter after Adam was born. That would be late 1996 into early 1997, and Adam is Wade Fontaine's son. He is the eldest of the 3. The DNA is not a matter of opinion. Which means that whatever the truth is about that November, the version they told me is not it. Either it started earlier than the furnace, or it started that same month and they both moved it a year forward, on purpose, in identical directions, 30 years later. I sat at that table with a pen in my hand at about 11 at night, and I understood that they had gotten together at some point to agree on a story, and that the story was designed to make it look like it began after the first baby, because a man can maybe survive being told his wife had an affair, and no man survives being told his wife was already gone before his first child was born. They were still protecting me. That is what I could not get over. 30 years in, with everything else on the table, they were still shaving the edges off it to make it bearable. Or they were protecting themselves, and it just looks like kindness from certain angles. I have never settled which. I need to stop here for a moment, because we are coming to the part I have not said out loud in one piece to anybody, including my lawyer. If you are still with me, do me one favor, subscribe. Not later, now, while you are sitting there thinking about it. I put a new one of these up every day, real stories about what people do to the ones who trusted them, and I would rather you did not have to go looking for the next one. Hit the like button on your way past. And in the comments, give me your answer to this one, because it is the question that has cost me the most sleep. If 2 people lie to you for 30 years to keep you from being destroyed, is that a kindness, Or is it the worst thing they did? Tell me. I read all of them. The affair ran 19 years. It was not continuous. Birdie's report could not tell me that, and neither of them would give me a full accounting. But from what I have pieced together, it ended, and restarted somewhere between 6 and 8 times. There were stretches of 2 years where nothing happened. There was a period around 2004 when Wade was seeing a woman named Roberta seriously enough that he brought her to Thanksgiving, and I now believe that was Lynette's doing, and I now believe it did not take 19 years. From a rented duplex in Independence to a house in Liberty with a sunroom, I have gone back through it. That is what you do. You go back through your entire life with a new set of eyes, and you find that almost nothing changes, and everything means something else. The Thursdays. That was the whole architecture, and it was hiding in plain sight for 2 decades. Thursday was my night. Thursday was when I did the carrier calls to the West Coast because of the time difference, and I did them from the office, and I was never home before 10. Everybody knew it. It was as fixed as a church service. The vacations Wade came on, 4 of them. Branson twice, Table Rock, and 1 week in Destin in 2009 that I paid for entirely and that I remember as one of the best weeks of my life. The way he was with the boys. Not warm exactly. Wade is not a warm man in the ordinary way. He was attentive. He watched them. When Cole was struggling with reading in 2nd grade, Wade knew about it before I did. I used to say that Wade was better with my kids than I was, and I used to say it as a compliment to him and a criticism of myself, and I said it in front of both of them, repeatedly, for 20 years. There are 3 of those weeks I go back to more than the others. Destin, Florida, the summer of 2009. I rented a house on the water for 9 days, and I paid for all of it. And I invited Wade because he was between women, and because it had never once occurred to me to have a family vacation without him. Adam was 13 and had just gotten tall. Cole was 10 and would not come out of the water. Nate was 7 and was afraid of the ocean for the first 2 days, and then was not. I worked most of that week. That is what I did on vacations. I would take the laptop out onto the screened porch at 6 in the morning and do rate confirmations until noon, and by the time I came out, the 4 of them would already be down at the water. There is a photograph from that trip that was on my refrigerator for 11 years. Wade is standing in about a foot of surf, with Nate on his shoulders. Lynette took it. The angle is slightly wrong because she was laughing. I looked at that photograph every morning for over a decade. I looked at it the morning I drove to Dr. Farrow's office. Then there was Thanksgiving of 2004, when Wade brought a woman named Roberta. She was a school administrator from Shawnee, and she was funny and direct, and she asked me real questions about the business, and I liked her enormously. I remember telling Lynette in the kitchen that night that this one seemed like it might actually go somewhere, and I remember that Lynette agreed with me, warmly, at length. It lasted about 4 months. I now believe Lynette engineered that entire introduction because Wade did not meet women on his own, and Roberta was a friend of a woman Lynette worked with. And I now believe she did it because there had been a stretch that year where it had ended between them, and putting him with somebody was the cleanest way to make sure it stayed ended. And it did not stay ended, and Roberta went away, and nobody ever explained why, and I never asked, because a man's private business is his own. And then there were the Thursdays, which were not events at all. That is what makes them the worst part. For 19 years, on a night of the week that I had personally established as the night I was never home, my wife and my best friend had a standing arrangement, and neither of them ever had to lie about it, because nobody ever asked. That is what I keep coming back to. There was no elaborate deception. There were no burner phones and no hotel receipts and no story that had to be maintained. There was a Thursday, and a man who was always around, and a husband who had built the schedule himself, and then bragged about how hard he worked. The one that gets me at 4 in the morning is a Saturday in 2011. We put the sign up that day, Dolan and Sons. I had the letters made at a shop in the West Bottoms, and I rented a lift, and I got Wade to come in on a Saturday to help me, because there was nobody else I would have asked. We were up on that lift for 3 hours getting it level. He was holding one end, and at some point he said, "That's a good sign, Ray." That is all he said. 4 words. I have thought about those 4 words more than I have thought about anything either of them said to me after I found out. 15 years ago, at a cookout at my house in July, Wade Fontaine took a plastic cup out of my son Adam's hand and put it in his truck. Adam was 15. There were probably 30 people in the yard. He ordered a consumer test, the kind anybody can buy, the kind people use to find out they are 11% Scottish. He sent in his own sample and Adam's. and 11 days later he had it. Then he did Cole, then he did Nate. He had all three inside of 2 months, and he did it in my house at my table with my food in his mouth. He has told me since that he was not trying to prove anything, that he needed to know. I believe that part. It is the only part of his account I do believe. Because he had been standing next to that family for 15 years by then, and he had never married, and he had never had anything of his own, and he was looking at a 15-year-old boy who stood the way he stood, and he needed to know whether the thing he had built his whole life around the edges of was real. And it was. And then he made a decision, and this is the decision that everything else comes out of. He did not tell me. He got in a truck, and he drove to a parking lot behind a shopping center on Nolan Road, which is about 400 yards from where that duplex used to be, and he called Lynette and asked her to meet him. She has told me about that conversation. It is the one part of this she did not fight me on, and I think that is because she has replayed it as many times as I have. She got there around 6:30 in the evening. He had the papers in a folder on the passenger seat, and he handed them to her through the window, and she read them in her own car, with the engine running. She did not know. That is the thing that took me the longest to accept, and the thing that I have concluded is true. She had been unfaithful, on and off, for 15 years by that point, and not only with him. She had never once wondered whose children they were, because she had no reason to. She was married. She was having children with her husband. Whatever else she was doing existed in a separate compartment, and it never occurred to her that the compartments had a wall between them made of paper. She told me that when she read that page in the parking lot, she got out of her car and was sick on the asphalt. Then they talked for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. That is what the two of them have told me, and their accounts agree, and I believe it, because I have thought about what I would have needed, and 20 minutes is about right. Here is what they decided in those 20 minutes, as best I have reconstructed it. That Adam was 15 and Cole was 12 and Nate was 9. That the middle one had just started at a new school and was not doing well. That the company had 91 employees. That telling me would end my marriage, end my relationship with 3 children, end Wade's job and his standing and every friendship he had, and would put a 15-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 9-year-old through something with no bottom to it. And that not telling me would cost nothing, today, in that parking lot, on that Tuesday. That is the entire calculation. It is not sophisticated. It is the same arithmetic that anybody does when they decide to put something off, and the only difference is the scale of the thing being put off. They decided to wait until the boys were grown. And then they waited, and Adam turned 18, and it was a bad time, because he was applying to schools, and then it was Cole's senior year, and then Nate got hurt playing ball and there was a surgery, and then it was 2020, and Lynette and I were divorcing, and telling me during a divorce would have been an act of war rather than an act of honesty. And then it was 15 years, and I was sitting in an exam room watching a man put down a pen. Neither of them knew I was infertile. Neither of them ever imagined it could be discovered, because who checks? A man does not check. There is no reason on earth for a 58-year-old man with 3 grown sons to ever find out that he could not have had them. They thought they had gotten away with something. They were correct. They had gotten away with it for 15 years, and they were going to get away with it forever, and the only reason they did not is that I had a cough my family used to imitate at Thanksgiving. Lynette came to my house 3 weeks after Bertie's report. I did not ask her to. She called and asked, and I said yes. She sat in the front room, not the kitchen, and she did not take her coat off. She did not cry, and she did not apologize, and I have come to think that the not apologizing was the most honest thing about it, because an apology would have implied she thought there was something available to fix. She told me the parking lot story. She told me the 20 minutes. She told me about being sick on the asphalt. And then she said the thing I have quoted to about 4 people since, and I am going to give it to you exactly. She said every year it got bigger. It was a thing I could have said in 2010 and survived. By 2015, it was a thing that would have taken the house. By 2020, it was a thing that would have taken the boys. And I kept thinking, next year I will be stronger, and every single year the price went up and I got weaker. Then she said, I know what that sounds like. I asked her whether she had ever, at any point, been going to tell me, and she said no, not a hesitation. Number, she said, if you had not gotten sick, I would have gone to my grave with it, and so would he, and I would have gone to your funeral and stood with our sons. That is the last real conversation I have had with the woman I was married to for 26 years. Everything after that has been through lawyers, and I am going to tell you about the lawyers, because that is where she showed me who she actually is, and it was not in my front room. There is a piece of this that has nothing to do with paternity, and I have to lay it out now, because without it the ending will not make sense. 2 years before all this, in the spring, I found a problem in the carrier settlement numbers. Carrier settlement is Wade's desk. Was Wade's desk. What that department does is pay the trucking companies who haul our customers' freight. A load is booked at a rate, the carrier is paid at a rate, and the difference is what we live on. I was doing a margin review, which I did 4 times a year, and there was a variance on a lane between Kansas City and Laredo that did not make sense. About $900 a month, that was not anywhere. It took me 11 days to find it, and I found it because I know this business better than anybody in that building. He had been shorting carriers, small amounts, on small carriers, 1 and 2 truck operations, the kind of outfit that is run by a man and his wife, and does not have an accounting department. He would settle a load at 96% of the agreed rate and code the 4% to a category called accessorial reconciliation, which is a real category that exists for real reasons and which nobody looks at. And then that money went out to a company registered in Missouri, under a name I had never heard of, which had a bank account, and which had 1 officer. 4 years, $340,000. I brought him into my office on a Friday at 6 in the evening, after the building was empty, and I put the file on the desk. He did not deny it. He cried. He said it started with 1, and he could not stop, and he had been sick about it for years. And here is what I did. I did not call the police. I did not call the FBI, which is who you call, because the wires that carried that money cross state lines every single time, and that is a federal offense. I had him sign a promissory note for the full amount, $340,000, payable out of his compensation over 11 years, with an acknowledgement paragraph at the top describing what the money was and how he took it. I had a lawyer drafted in one afternoon, and I did not tell that lawyer anything except what to put in it. I moved him off the settlement desk and into carrier relations, which is a real job with no money in it. I told him it was a restructuring. Nobody in that building ever knew. I kept him employed. I kept his insurance. He had a knee replacement 4 months later on my policy. I did it because he was 16 years old, on a loading dock with me in 1983, and because he was the best man at my wedding, and because I could not make myself be the man who ended him. I am telling you all this because 2 years later, when I found out what I found out, the first fully formed thought I had was not about my sons. It was that the note was still in my safe, and that the statute of limitations on wire fraud is 5 years, and his scheme had ended 22 months before I found it, which meant the clock had not run out. I had, sitting in a fireproof box in my office, a signed confession from the man who fathered my children, describing a federal crime, in his own handwriting, that I had chosen not to report. And the only thing standing between Wade Fontaine and a federal indictment was that I had decided, on a Friday evening in the spring, to be a good friend about it. I stopped deciding that. The last thing Bertie Cowell's people found, they found by accident, and they found it in a storage unit in Independence that Lynette had been paying $11 a month for since 2019 and had forgotten about. It came up in an asset trace that my divorce attorney ordered for an entirely different reason. There were 4 boxes in it. 3 of them were Christmas decorations. The 4th one had a folder in it. Inside that folder was a draft petition for the appointment of a conservator over the estate of Raymond Dolan, prepared by a firm in Overland Park, dated a little under 3 years ago, unfiled, never filed, 22 pages with the blanks filled in. Behind it were 41 pages of notes. I need to explain what a conservatorship is, because most people hear the word guardianship and think of an old man in a home, and that is not what this is. A conservator is a person the court appoints to control your property when you are found to lack the capacity to manage it. Your accounts, your contracts, your business. If a court had granted that petition, the person named in it would have had legal authority over a freight brokerage with 94 employees and my name on the building. The person named in it was Lynette. The notes were the case for it. 41 pages, dated, going back 4.5 years. The summer I ended up in an emergency room in Blue Springs, unable to say what day it was. She wrote that up. 2 pages. She noted that I had been confused, that I did not recognize a nurse, that I had been combative. She had made a call to my primary care physician's office 11 months before the petition was drafted, expressing concern about cognitive changes in her ex-husband and asking whether anyone had considered an evaluation. There is a note in my own medical chart about that call. I have read it. It is 4 lines long and it is in my file forever. And then there were the incidents from the business. 19 of them. A rate confirmation sent with the wrong figure. A carrier double paid. A customer contract with a wrong effective date. A lane committed at a rate that lost money. 19 separate documented errors, with dates, described as mistakes made by me. I know every one of those files. I pulled all 19. 14 of them were Wade's. He made them. His login, his desk, his initials on the internal approval line, in a system that timestamps everything and that I built the audit trail for myself in 2008. 14 errors that came off that man's desk were written up by my ex-wife as evidence that I was losing my faculties, which means he gave them to her. There is no other way. She did not have access to that system and would not have known what she was looking at if she did. Somebody inside that building went through 4 years of operational files, pulled the mistakes, and handed them over. And that is not the worst of it. This is. The confusion in the emergency room in Blue Springs was hyponatremia, low sodium. It is one of the most common acute presentations of what I have, because men with cystic fibrosis lose enormous amounts of salt in their sweat. And on a job site in July in Missouri, you can drop your sodium low enough to become genuinely disoriented. That is not dementia. It is not decline. It is a chemistry problem that resolves with fluids and salt in about 18 hours, and it is a symptom of the exact same genetic condition that meant I could never have children. The disease that gave them their sons is the disease she used to try to take my company. I have had 2 years to find a way to say that sentence, so it hurts less, and I have not found one. The petition was never filed. I do not know why, and I have never asked, and neither of them has volunteered it. My best guess, and it is only a guess, is that the lawyer in Overland Park read the file and told them what any competent lawyer would tell them, which is that a conservatorship petition against a 56-year-old man who runs a 9-figure business every day is not a filing, it is a lawsuit you lose in public. But they built it. They sat down together and built it, and they kept it, and it sat in a storage unit in Independence, next to 3 boxes of Christmas decorations for 3 years. I told my sons on a Sunday, in the building, in the conference room, because I could not do it in a house that any of us had memories in. I had everything printed, the genetics, the urology, the 3 paternity reports, Bertie's summary, the petition, and the notes. I told them the medicine first, because the medicine is not anybody's fault. Cole is 27. He has worked for me since he was 22, and he is going to run that company one day. He read about 4 pages and stood up and walked out of the room, and I let him go, and he came back 11 minutes later and sat down and said, "Keep going." Nate is 24 and he cried through most of it, which I expected, because Nate has always been the one who feels things out loud, and I have never once thought less of him for it. Adam is 30, and Adam did not say anything at all. He read every page. He took his time. Then he asked me 2 questions, and both of them were about whether I was sure, and both of them were fair questions, and I answered them. And then he said, "Does Mom know you have all this?" I said she knew about most of it. And he said, "Okay," and he stood up, and he put his hand on my shoulder for about 2 seconds, and he left. That was 11 months of Adam, right there, that 2 seconds. Cole did the test himself the following week. Nobody asked him to. He ordered it, and he did it, and he told me the result before he told anybody else, and the result was the result, and then he said the thing that is the reason I am still standing. He said, "I already knew what it was going to say. I did it so I could say I know, and you know, and it does not change anything." Nate did his 8 days after that, for the same reason. Cole stopped speaking to his mother inside of 2 weeks, completely and without a scene, which is his way. He did not block her number. He simply stopped answering it, and when she came to the building, he had Alma Ruiz at the front desk tell her he was not available, and Alma has worked for me for 24 years and did it without asking a single question. Nate took about 2 months longer, and it was uglier, because Nate does not have Cole's ability to just close a door. There was a Sunday afternoon at her house that I only know about secondhand, and that I am not going to describe. Adam did not go anywhere. For 11 months, Adam stayed exactly where he was, which is close to his mother, and I let him. I never once asked him to choose, and I never once said a word about it, because he is 30 years old, and because the day I start requiring my sons to pick sides is the day I become somebody I would not want in my house. I had to tell the building too, and that was its own thing. 94 people worked there. Wade Fontaine had been in that building for 22 years. He knew their kids' names. He organized the thing at Christmas every year where everybody brought a dish. One Monday he was there, and the next Monday he was not, and there is no version of a company that small where you can let that sit. I told them almost nothing. I stood in the warehouse bay on a Tuesday morning with the whole operation in front of me, and I said that Wade was no longer with the company, that the circumstances were serious, that there was an ongoing federal matter, and that I would not be taking questions about it, and that nobody in that building had done anything wrong, and nobody's job was in any danger. Then I said that some of them were going to hear things over the next year, and that most of what they heard would be accurate. Alma Ruiz has been at the front desk for 24 years. She was there before Wade was. She came into my office that afternoon, closed the door, sat down, and said one sentence. She said, "Do you need me to pull anything? Not what happened. Not is it true." She had already worked out what shape the thing was, because she has been sitting at that desk for 24 years, and she has watched every person who came in and out of it, and I have since learned from 3 separate people that she had never liked him and had never once said so to anyone. She pulled 19 files from me over the following 4 days, and it was Alma who put the timestamps side by side and showed me that 14 of the 19 errors in Lynette's notes had come off his desk with his initials on the approval line. She is the reason that section of the record exists. Not Bertie, not the lawyers. A woman at a front desk who knew where everything was. Here is what I did not do. I did not try to disestablish paternity. My lawyer raised it as a technical option, and I told her to take it off the table in the first meeting. Those are my sons. Adam has my last name and my temper and my inability to leave a room when I am angry. Cole came to work for me at 22 and is better at this than I ever was. Nate learned to drive in the lot behind the building on Sunday mornings, in my truck, with me in the passenger seat telling him to stop riding the clutch. A test told me a fact about a cell. It did not tell me anything about who those 3 men are, and it did not tell me anything about the 30 years. And no laboratory in this country is equipped to have an opinion about the 30 years. What I went after was the divorce. 6 years ago, when Lynette and I dissolved a 26-year marriage, she signed a sworn financial statement, and she answered questions under oath, and one of those questions concerned the children of the marriage. And I agreed to a division of marital property that any lawyer in this state would describe as generous, and I agreed to it for one reason, which I stated out loud in a conference room in 2020 with 4 people present, which is that she was the mother of my 3 sons and that I was not going to have my boys watch their mother be treated as an adversary. It is in the transcript. In Missouri, a judgment can be attacked for fraud, and under the rule, most of those attacks have to be brought within a year. That window closed 5 years before I ever heard of a sweat chloride test. But there is a separate thing, older than the rule, and preserved by it, called fraud upon the court. It is not about a lie told to your opponent. It is about conduct that corrupts the ability of the court itself to do its job. And it has no time limit whatsoever. None. You can bring it in year 20. That is what my attorney, a woman named Dana Whitfield who has done family law in Jackson County for 26 years, filed as an independent action. The argument was straightforward. A dissolution court cannot equitably divide marital property if a party has misrepresented, under oath, the fundamental facts on which the other party's consent rests. My consent to that division was procured by an unbroken 15-year deception, maintained deliberately through the proceeding itself, on a subject the court specifically inquired into. It took 14 months. The part of it I was not prepared for was the deposition. Dana Whitfield took Lynette's deposition on a Tuesday in September, in a conference room in a building on Main Street, with a court reporter and a videographer and a paralegal, and the 2 of us on one side of a table, and Lynette and her attorney on the other. I had a right to be in that room, and Dana asked me twice whether I wanted to be, and I said yes both times, and I have gone back and forth since about whether that was courage or something worse. It ran 5 hours and 20 minutes. She was sworn in. She gave her full name and her date of birth and her current address, which was still the house in Liberty at that point. And then for 5 hours, a woman I had been married to for 26 years answered questions about the interior of my life in a flat, careful voice, with pauses in the right places where her attorney had trained her to put them. There is a specific thing that happens in a deposition that nobody warns you about. It is not the answers, it is the format. Everything is a question, and everything is a fact, and there is no room anywhere for a human being to say something is complicated. Do you recall executing the financial statement marked as Exhibit 4? Yes. Directing your attention to page 2, question 11, yes. Did you answer that question truthfully? No. That is a transcript. That is what it looks like on paper. 3 words, and then the reporter's keys, and then the next question, and it took about 9 seconds, and there is a videotape of it. Around hour 4, her attorney asked for a break, and they went out into the hallway, and Dana went to the restroom, and for about 90 seconds I was alone in that conference room with the court reporter, who was a woman in her 60s named Delphine, who had not looked up in 5 hours. She capped her pen and she said, quietly, without looking at me, that she had been doing this for 31 years. That is all she said. I have thought about it 100 times. The judgment came down in February. The property division was set aside in its entirety, and the matter reopened for redistribution on a full record. The dollars are not the point, but people always ask, so here they are. The house in Liberty went. The portion of the business value that had been allocated to her, which she had taken as a note payable over 12 years, was extinguished. The maintenance terminated. She kept her retirement account, which was hers, and a vehicle. And there is a finding of fact in a public court file in Jackson County, Missouri, with her name on it, that says what she did. That file does not expire. Anybody who ever wants to look can look. Wade's part took 10 weeks. I turned the promissory note over to the United States Attorney's Office for the Western District of Missouri, along with 4 years of settlement records, the shell company registration, and the bank documents. I did not have to build a case. I had built it 2 years earlier and then put it in a safe. He had signed a document in his own hand with an acknowledgement paragraph at the top that described in plain English what he had taken and how, because I had a lawyer draft it that way in 1996 language for exactly one reason, which was to make sure he could never later claim it had been a loan. He was indicted on 11 counts of wire fraud. Every payment out of that shell account crossed a state line electronically, and each one is its own count, which is a thing most people do not know about federal fraud, and which is why federal fraud sentences look the way they do. He pleaded. There was never any question that he would plead. 46 months, restitution of $340,000 to 11 carriers, most of them 1-truck and 2-truck operations run by people who never knew they had been robbed, and who got checks in the mail from a court clerk's office with no explanation that made any sense to them. He is 59 years old. He will be 63 when he comes out, with a felony conviction, no assets, no house, and a 22-year employment history at a company that will not confirm anything beyond dates. I went to the sentencing. Nobody asked me to. Restitution victims get notice, and I got the notice in the mail, and I put it on the counter and looked at it for 11 days. It was on the 4th floor of the federal courthouse downtown on a Wednesday morning, and it took 50 minutes, and there were 9 people in the gallery, and 6 of them were there for a different case. He had a lawyer he could not afford, and a suit that did not fit anymore, because he had lost weight. His attorney spoke for about 12 minutes. He talked about the knee. He talked about 22 years of employment with a single company, and no prior record of any kind. He said that his client had cooperated fully from the first contact and had never once denied a single allegation, and that was true, and the prosecutor confirmed it. Then Wade was given the opportunity to address the court, which they always are. He stood up, and he said he was sorry to the carriers. He named 2 of them. He had their names memorized, a man in Sedalia and a husband and wife out of Nevada, Missouri, and he said their names out loud in a federal courtroom and said he had taken money from people who did not have it. And then he stopped, and there was a pause that went on long enough that the judge asked him if there was anything further. And he said no. He never turned around. He knew I was there. There were 9 people in that room, and he never turned around one time in 50 minutes. And I have decided that was the only decent thing available to him, and that he did it on purpose. The judge imposed the sentence and set a self-surrender date, and it was over, and I was in the parking garage by 10:30 in the morning, and I sat in the truck for a while before I started it. He also lost the only thing he was ever actually after. He was not after money. He took the money because it was there, and because he was weak, and I think it genuinely made him sick. What he wanted, for 30 years, was to stand as close as a man can stand to a family without being in it. He got to be at every Christmas, every graduation. He got to sit in a hospital room for 11 hours and read to a 9-year-old. And now 3 grown men know exactly why he was there, and not one of them has spoken to him, and not one of them ever will. 6 weeks after the property division was set aside, Lynette filed a motion of her own. I did not expect it, and neither did Dana Whitfield, and when the copy came through the office, I read it twice. 22 pages. She asked the court to reopen the division on the merits and award her a full and equitable share, and she made 3 specific requests: a percentage of the business, reinstatement of maintenance, and the house in Liberty. Her theory was that she had raised 3 children across 26 years, that her contribution to the marital estate was substantial and non-monetary, and that my own concealment of a genetic condition should be weighed against her conduct. That last part is not entirely frivolous, and I sat with it honestly for a day. I had a condition. I did not tell her about it. The reason I did not tell her about it is that I did not know about it until I was 58 years old, but she was entitled to make the argument, and her lawyer made it competently. Cole read the filing before I did, because it came to the office and he opens the mail. He came into my office and put it on the desk, and he was white in the face, and he said, "She wrote 22 pages about us, and she never used our names." I did not understand him at first. So I read it, all 22 pages. There is no request in that motion regarding her sons, not visitation, which she does not need since they are grown men, not a request for a family therapist, not a request that anybody be compelled to sit in a room with her for 1 hour. Not a sentence, anywhere in 22 pages, expressing a desire to have a relationship with her 3 children. They appear 11 times. Every single one of them is in a phrase like the children of the marriage, or the party's 3 children, or in support of the move-on's contribution. She had 1 document left in the world, one last thing she could put in front of a judge, and she spent all 22 pages of it on a house and a percentage. The court denied it in 4 pages. The reasoning was a doctrine that every first-year law student learns, and that almost nobody outside a courtroom has ever heard of. He who comes into equity must come with clean hands. You do not get to ask a court of equity to redistribute property in your favor, when the reason the distribution is being revisited at all is a fraud you committed on that same court. 4 pages. Denied with prejudice. She is 61 years old. She is living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Overland Park. She works part-time at a dental practice in Merriam, which is the profession she left in 1999. I do not take satisfaction in that, and I am not going to perform any for you. She built it herself, one small refusal at a time, over 30 years, and the last time she had a chance to build something else, she wrote 22 pages and did not use her sons' names. Adam came back on a Thursday in October, 11 months after that conference room. There was no confrontation, and no apology, and no scene. He called at about 4 in the afternoon and asked if I was going to be at the building for a while, and I said I was, and he came by around 6. He had a folder with him. It was a quote on a trailer lease for a customer of ours in Springfield, and he had questions about it, and he does not work for me, and has never worked for me, and had no business having questions about it. We sat in my office for 2 hours and talked about trailer leases. At the end of it, he stood up in the doorway and said, "I read the filing." That is all he said about it. Then he said he would see me Sunday. He has come every Sunday since. He has never told me why it took 11 months, and I have never asked him, and I am not going to, because he is 30 years old, and he does not owe me a report on his own conscience. I know he still speaks to his mother. I have never asked about that either. Wade came to my house one time, before he reported. It was February, and there was snow on the drive that I had not cleared. He must have known I would not open the door if I saw the truck, so he parked down the street and walked, and the first I knew about it was the bell. He stood on my porch in a coat I recognized because I was there when he bought it. He said, "Ray, I need 8 minutes." He said, "There are things about it you do not know, and you are going to spend the rest of your life with a version of it that is not what happened, and I can give you the real one, and it is the only thing I have left that is worth anything to you." And he may have been right. I have thought about that more than I have thought about almost anything. He probably did have something. 30 years, 19 of them inside my marriage, 15 of them knowing about my sons. There is no chance he did not have something I do not have. I said no. He said, "Please." I said, "You had 31 years to say it while it would have cost you something. Now it costs you nothing, and it would cost me everything. And you are still asking for the version where you get to feel better." And I closed the door. I stood in my front hall for a while, and I could hear him on the porch not leaving, and then eventually I heard him leave. That is the last time I saw him outside of a courtroom. I have never found out what he was going to say, and I have decided that I am not going to. The sign still says Dolan and Sons. Cole asked me about it, About 4 months after all of it, in a way that was very careful and very indirect, the way you ask something you have been carrying around for weeks. He wanted to know if I was going to change it. I told him it was staying up, because that sign is not about a chromosome. I put those letters up on a Saturday in 2011, because I had 3 boys and I wanted them to drive past a building with their name on it, and all 3 of them still have that name, and one of them runs my operations desk and is going to run the whole thing, and one of them comes on Sundays, and one of them still cannot start a truck without riding the clutch. There is no laboratory in the United States that can measure what I am describing, and there does not need to be. I have thought a great deal about what actually happened to me, and I have landed somewhere I did not expect. Nobody in this story set out to do the thing they ended up doing. Lynette did not get married intending any of it. Wade did not drive to that duplex in November of 1995 with a plan. In a parking lot on Nolan Road 15 years ago, 2 people had 20 minutes and a piece of paper and 3 children's lives in front of them, and they took the option that cost nothing that day. And that is the whole mechanism. That is all it ever is. Every year that they did not say it, the price of saying it went up, and every year the price went up, they were a little less able to pay it. That is not a conspiracy. That is compound interest. It is the exact same arithmetic as a debt you do not open the envelope on, and it ends the same way, which is that eventually, the number is bigger than everything you own. By the end, they were not protecting me, and they were not even really protecting my sons. They were protecting the decision. 30 years of a man's life became the collateral on 20 minutes in a parking lot, and when it finally came due, the interest on it was a conservatorship petition sitting in a storage unit next to the Christmas decorations. So here is what I would leave you with. Everybody knows the phrase about how the cover-up is worse than the crime, and everybody thinks it is about politicians. It is not. It is about your marriage, and your best friend, and the thing you did in 1996 that you have never said out loud. Lynette had an affair. That is a thing that happens in a great many marriages, and a great many of them survive it, and I have thought honestly about whether ours would have, and I think there is a version where it does. But she did not tell me for 19 years, and then she found out about my sons, and did not tell me for 15 more, and by then she needed me not to find out badly enough that she wrote down the times I had been confused. That is the road. It is not a cliff, it is a grade, and it is so gentle that you can walk down it for 30 years and never once feel yourself descending. If there is a thing you are not saying, the price of it is going up right now, while you are listening to this. It is going up today, and the version of you that could have paid it was last year, and the version of you that can pay it next year does not exist. I do not know who my father is in the sense that other people mean it. I know who mine was. I know who I am to 3 men, and I know that a room full of people applauded once, while I stood up with a glass in my hand and thanked my best friend for looking after my wife. If you got something out of this one, subscribe before you go. That is the one that actually matters. I put a new story up every single day, and the next one is already written. Hit like on your way out. It genuinely helps this reach the people it is for. And in the comments, tell me the honest thing, not the nice one. 30 years. 3 sons who are yours in every way that a man can be a father. Would you have gone looking for the name, or would you have let it go? I read every single one of them. I will see you in the next one.